JB Pritzker, taxes, and Satan. We talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the weekly program about state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on Capitol View is Adrianna Pitrelli of the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin. Welcome, Adrianna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And also Brian Mackey, State House reporter for NPR Illinois.
Good to be with you again, Bruce.
Well, thanks for coming. This week, we are hearing some rumblings, perhaps, of, well, as always, of taxes, but Rahm Emanuel, mayor of Chicago, is proposing a constitutional amendment to address pension issues. He wants to stop the automatic 3% cost of living increases that are now called for, that state retirees now get. And to do that, of course, he'd have to put it on before voters. First, 3/5 of the legislature must vote to put it on the ballot, and then it would go before voters probably in the 2020 general election. Why might the mayor of Chicago be proposing to do this now? Any guesses?
Well, I don't have a direct line into his heart or soul or anything like that.
If he has one.
But he is in that position of being a self-imposed lame duck.
Sure.
And so sometimes lame duck politicians feel like they can say things that they wouldn't be able to say if they were on the ballot, and taking on the public employee unions like AFSCME and the Fraternal Order of Police and other organizations that are very important to Democrats who want to win office, saying that we should do things that could affect your pension benefits is not a popular thing for Democrats to say.
Sure.
So perhaps this just feels this is a good opportunity, since he is not seemingly running for office again, at least not anytime soon, that he's free to say what needs to be said, you might say.
The voice of truth, so to speak.
Perhaps.
Okay. I mean, does something like this have any kind of legs? I mean, is this something, pensions obviously were, what, $135 billion in the whole, that's the latest?
A couple billion less than that, I think, but yeah, close
Give or
enough.
take.
A billion here, a billion there.
Yeah, more than we can raise through taxing legal marijuana. And so are they going to do something here? And in terms of putting it on the ballot, if it got to the ballot, how popular would that be?
That's a good question. I think I should say, as a matter of disclosure, that I am a member of the state university retirement system, because our station is a licensee of the University of Illinois system. So take this with a grain of salt, I guess. But the pensions have long been looked at as, on both the left and the right, as something that need to be addressed in Illinois. On the right, because the feeling is that taxes will eventually have to go up to make due for taxes that should have been higher in the past, right? Some of this goes back decades in terms of underfunding the pension systems.
Well, not just that, but let's make clear also the state skipped making their pension benefits or payments, and that's a huge part of the problem as well.
There's a really neat chart that the legislature's budget forecasting arm does a couple times a year. They just came out with it from last month, and it shows over the past couple of decades what share of the unfunded liability, that $130+ billion number you cited, is because of stock market returns maybe not doing as well as we expected, or because of state employee salary increases or benefit increases. Now, salary increases actually cause that liability to go down. So many people have left the state workforce that has helped decrease or kept the number from being higher than it would have been. The biggest share by far, though, is the legislature not putting in the money it's supposed to put into this. And that is because people like Governor Rod Blagojevich, but to an extent some of his predecessors as well, said you can have all these great programs and we can keep your taxes relatively low. And they did that in part by not paying enough into the pensions. And we're still not paying what the systems say we should be actuarially paying every year in order to help bring down that backlog. But on the other hand, the state is on a path. We have to come up with hundreds of millions of dollars every year or so, a few $100 million more every year to make up to get on that path. But by 2045, I think, we will be at 90% funding if we can stick with that path. But many people say that's unsustainable.
Okay, fair enough. The other thing that Mayor Emanuel has floated is a fairly significant increase in the gasoline tax. It now stands at 19 cents per gallon. It hasn't been raised since, I believe, the 1990s, so it's been a while. He's talking anywhere between a 20 and 30 cent increase in a tax that now stands at 19 cents. How's that going to go over?
I mean, I think, like you said, it hasn't been changed since 1991, I believe. And so if you think about it, yes, it probably does need to be increased. And in the grand scheme of things, maybe if it went up to 30%, that seems like a lot. But he mentioned that that would actually be equivalent to the inflation rate over the past 28 or so years. So it's something that might necessarily, be needed. And Rauner's administration said that about 3/4 of the bridges throughout the state need construction, and so the roads need help, and maybe this money can help out with that. But I also saw that it's an estimated about $320 million in additional transportation funding will go to the Chicago region. But what about downstate? Is this another thing where people in Chicago are kind of deciding what the rest of the state needs? Or is downstate going to reap a lot of benefits for that? It's something that we kind of definitely need to see a bigger, broader picture of, where this money would go. And I think if people knew that, okay, yes, this money is going to fix these potholes, or they're going to fix these bridges I drive over all the time, then they'd be more apt to be in favor of it. But if we're thinking, okay, well, it's just going to go to Chicago, and how often do people in Chicago drive, and do people in Chicago need this?
Yeah. I mean, they don't, they can spread it around as they need it to get the votes that they need to get the tax increase, which is they've done traditionally, because, everybody seems to want a capital bill, but you got to fund it somehow, and this would be the funding mechanism to pay for a capital bill. I've always been in favor, frankly, of taxing toilet paper, because that can take care of part of the sewer systems, but nobody ever seems to go for that. In terms of doing the capital bill, I would imagine, for one thing, it's a lot less difficult. It doesn't have to go before the voters. All you got to do is get enough legislators, and it would be a straight majority to get it raised. Jobs in my district, sure, that sounds good. But this degree of an increase is fairly large. I mean, I'm wondering if this is you start high and bargain down low and end up somewhere in the middle.
I mean, that seems like a reasonable supposition. I think it's also interesting that it comes at a time when we have relatively low gas prices.
Right, I saw $1.76 gallon on the way over here. Yeah.
Wow, that's not. I was going to say it paid $2.04, and I thought I was doing really well just a week or so
Well,
ago.
in an hour on our way home, we'll.
Well, and this is, and we've seen car manufacturers say we are getting out of the sedan business.
Sure.
Because people want these bigger cars. Low gas prices lead people to purchase bigger gas guzzling cars in America, at least.
Sure.
And despite the talk and push, the enthusiasm among some for Tesla and electric cars,
Right.
Chevy is pulling back on the Volt as one of its cars. And so on the one hand, you have low gas prices, so people are buying these gas guzzlers. If you then come in and impose this, increase on the cost of gasoline, it'll be interesting to see how there's a lot of moving parts here. If we head into another recession, which it's a question of when, not if. So when we have another recession, will energy prices rise? You often hear about people in the legislature proposing a gas tax holiday when we have those. So there are all these considerations. There are a lot of claims on what state money should be paid for. JB Pritzker, the governor-elect, had a lot of programs he talked about implementing. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how people balance these concerns in the coming months.
No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, if you're going to increase the price or the gas tax, you do it when it's $2 a gallon, not when it's $3 and change. And so the stars are aligning to a certain extent, and the window would seem not forever. I think I was reading something in the Wall Street Journal the other day, something like half of the financial gurus they talked to were predicting a recession within the next year. So it may be looming upon us. The other thing, speaking of the tax issue, the progressive/graduated income tax. I'd written about that this week in the sense of how many of your eggs do you put in that basket as opposed to dealing with the tax system you've got. Let's talk about the graduated prospects for a graduated income tax. If I put a gun to your head, make a prediction, what do you think, Brian?
Well, I don't do predictions, but I think that I can say that Governor-elect Pritzker campaigned on this relentlessly,
Sure.
Which I have thought was a long time in coming. You look at the polling on this, it actually polls above 50% even among Republicans. And it's much more popular than that among Democrats who,
Right.
as we saw in this election, have a majority in this state. And so this seems like if you were going to try and do that, this seems like the time to do it. You have Democratic supermajorities in the House and Senate,
Yeah.
which you would need to change the Constitution to get this, as you said, this has to go before voters because we have a constitutional flat tax. But
Sure.
it seems like this is something that if it's framed the right way, and there will certainly be a lot of forces pushing against it,
Right.
but if it's framed the right way, you say we're going to make the rich pay their fair share or something like that. That's from the
fair
Democratic
tax,
side.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. Then it seems like you could move popular will on this. I even heard somebody who said that they heard a Republican once confide to them that they know it's popular with voters and that's why they don't want it on the ballot because they're afraid people might actually support it. And I mean, to be fair though, based on the polling I've seen, I have been surprised at how much Governor Rauner, for example, staked his campaign on opposing this graduated income tax because he does seem to be someone who is traditionally very sensitive to polling, and all the polling I've seen shows that this is a fairly popular idea. And so it was a bit of a disconnect. I guess it's probably something he really believes is a terrible idea.
I mean, I would wonder, though, if we get down to brass tacks and it gets serious, I mean, as you suggest, there's going to be some heavy money that comes out against it. And what effect would that sort of a campaign have on public opinion?
Yeah, I'm sure it could move things certainly move things a little. Will it be enough? Well, we have 2 years until that goes on the ballot to find out.
Which I think is another interesting point, or at least a point worth making. It's 2 years before it goes on the ballot. The odds, I would think, for the legislature and the Governor Pritzker, he'll be governor then, to say, okay, if you vote for this, here's what your tax rate is going to be. I'm not sure that is what they would do. And my guess is what they would do is they would simply pull that, black out the part about flat tax and then go into the next session. But that would be 2021 when they designed a new tax code. The first bills would go out probably in 2022, which that's an election year. Would they want to do that?
I mean, you could have something waiting and ready to go that, if this becomes constitutional. But you're right. Pritzker showed that he was not willing to talk about the rates on the campaign, and I don't know what the political consideration would be. Will he talk about them before it goes on the ballot, or would that be something that Democrats felt compelled to make as a selling point to say, well, here's what you can expect your rates to be? Because in the absence of that information, you can be sure that opposition is going to paint
They'll
the
tell
darkest,
you what your rates are going to be.
they're going to tell you everybody's going to pay more and, paint the bleakest picture they possibly can to oppose it.
I mean, one of the things that I had wondered about is, do we wait that long, or do we say, okay, we've got, I think all sides of the political spectrum agree on one thing. The tax system we've got now is not a good one. It's fair. I think I saw something from some think tank. It's listed as the 8th most regressive in the United States. We leave huge sectors of the economy untaxed, most notably services. Retirement income is not taxed at all, no matter how much retirement income you might have. Do you think that they're ready to visit those issues, or are those dead and gone and in the rearview mirror? What do you think?
I mean, I think if they're going to talk about taxes, they should just go ahead and talk about them all now. Like you said, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to happen during this session because it requires a constitutional amendment. If they're going to start having these discussions and meet, then they might as well meet on all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the argument, or one school of thought, might be, make what you've got now as good as you can until you get something, a progressive tax down the road. And again, it's not a done deal. It depends on what the voters would do. And if they say no, aren't you right back to square one?
Well, though Governor-elect Pritzker campaigned on saying there are things we could do in the interim to make our tax system sort of quasi-progressive through rebates and stuff, but he backed away from that since winning office. So that seems to be something he's not enthusiastic about. There is a very sound public policy argument for taxing retirement income. For one thing, a huge portion of that, I don't want to cite the number, it's not, I don't think it's quite half, but double-digit percentage of so-called retirement income is not earned by retired people. As an example, my wife and I inherited a very small amount from a relative of hers who passed away. Got a little bit of a benefit from the pension. It was a few $1,000s. Not a huge windfall, but not nothing. And it wasn't taxed in the state of Illinois because it's retirement income. And I can tell you, I'm pretty far from retirement age. So those are the sorts of, that's where you say so much retirement income is not taxed. It's not all earned by retired people. And yet, if you are an elderly person who has to work as, the stereotypical example is the Walmart greeter, right? That person is paying tax on their income.
Right.
So there are ways
on their paycheck.
On their paycheck income. So you can imagine maybe if you structured it and said, okay, for anyone over age 65, you don't pay any tax on your first $50,000, something, just to pick a round number.
50,000 gets thrown out the most
right.
often.
So I mean, there are ways of making sure that our older people in our society who've worked their whole lives and are trying to save money and on fixed incomes or on low incomes, there are ways of insulating the people who are most vulnerable in that bracket while also addressing this issue of so much retirement income not actually being earned by retired people.
Yeah, I recall the last time something like that got floated, even with the 50,000 exemption, AARP amongst others, where it was, no, this is horrible, this is you're going to hurt, the stereotypical Walmart greeter, the folks that are just eking by after working hard all their lives. How do you, is there a way to say, hey, if you're making, don't worry, it's going to be 50,000. I don't know, you put it in the Constitution or something, so you seal it up. But how do you deal with that kind of a fear?
The Constitution, we have been, the inability of legislators to act, I'm going to say this is kind of a bold statement maybe, the inability of legislators to act responsibly has led us to put more and more restrictions on their behavior in the Constitution, as with the Transportation Lockbox Amendment, right? Because you say the money should be spent for transportation and instead maybe it gets tapped for this, that, and the other thing. And so we changed the Constitution to say, no, transportation money is spent on transportation.
Right.
I think that as a matter of philosophical matter, it would be a bad idea to get that specific in the Constitution because you sort of handcuff things. And if you can imagine, maybe they forget to index it to inflation or something like that. Crazier things have happened. Well, remember that just a few years ago, there was a sunset on a tax provision that expired in the middle of a fiscal year instead of at the end of the fiscal year, which was largely viewed as an oversight, I think, in retrospect. So, hopefully this would not be among them, but there's a reason that you make the Constitution sort of broad, vague language and you work out the details in statute because that can be more easily changed.
Do we think that Ogilvy's ghost, so to speak, is still in Springfield? He was a governor who I think most folks in retrospect agree did the responsible thing. He instituted the income tax, he pushed for it, and he was a one-termer. Are folks remembering that?
They might be. Taxes are a sensitive subject with I think a lot of people, and they don't see, they feel like they don't see where their money's going, or they feel like they're getting taxed too much. And I think until we see, what are these brackets? What's considered high class? What's considered middle class? What are these numbers going to be? I think until we see that, people might be against it because they don't know how this is truly going to affect them.
I'll just throw this out, just maybe it's a harebrained idea, but if you did broaden the base here by extending the sales tax to services, if you tax retirement income above 50,000, 75,000, pick a figure, you could at least in theory lower the rate, could you not? And is that a sweetener to make folks say, gee, maybe they are serious about getting it right this time?
You could even lower the rate without doing those things by just increasing the rate on, say, people who make over $500,000 a year or 400 or a million or whatever. The millionaire's tax, yes. There are all kinds of ways you can structure this to hold harmless the people who are, what we would call middle income. Although more people think they're middle income probably than the legislature does.
Everybody thinks they're middle
exactly.
income. Well, I mean, I guess to my point, I mean, I was wondering if you can do that now. In other words, you don't have to wait for that constitutional amendment. That's somewhat a burden the bush as opposed to the one on the hand. I'm wondering if you were really serious about doing an overhaul with what you got now, because you are stuck with what you've got now until something down the road may or may not happen. What if we could lower the rates? Is that perhaps it's politically impossible? I don't know.
I mean, I think we're in a remarkable place because you have a candidate for governor who won campaigning on a major change in the tax system.
Yes.
In terms of the graduated or progressive income tax. And he won big, 15 percentage points.
Yeah.
But he did not campaign on changing the service tax, and he did not campaign on doing other things to our tax structure.
And remember, he also campaigned against Bruce Rauner.
Who was very weak opponent,
Yeah,
right.
right.
But I mean, he can claim a mandate on this graduated income tax thing, I think. The other things I'm not so sure.
Okay.
And he's got a lot else going on, right? He's got to push for a sort of infrastructure spending bill.
Right.
He's going to push for legalization of recreational marijuana. He's talking about having Medicaid for all, or basically opening up the state Medicaid system so that anyone could buy into it if they wanted to.
$15 an hour minimum wage?
15 minimum wage. Yeah, he has a big agenda, and adding, the complexity of not just changing this one thing that's a constitutional amendment and we'll work out the details later versus let's totally rewrite our tax code. It'll be interesting to see if he chooses to do that. I would be surprised if he made that decision.
Does he overpromise? Does he take on? I mean, Bruce Rauner's infamous turnaround agenda. How many items were on that one?
44.
44. Thank you. That's a great trivia question. At some point, could he say? I mean, could it not collapse of its own weight? But does he need to prioritize here? Can he do all this stuff?
I don't think he can. I mean, he might be able to, but yes, prioritizing is definitely important. You don't want to take on too many things, and even voters and constituents don't want to see their government taking on too many things they can handle. Figure out what's most important for the state, what's gonna, both be fiscally best for the state and for your constituents, and kind of just go from there. And it might be one of those things where with taxes, for instance, we start seeing stuff this session and we slowly go into it. And I think that might be better than doing a huge overhaul a few years from now. You might just slowly get into it and do the research and see, as we're going on, what do we need?
No, I mean, the devil's going to be in the details. And speaking of the devil, the state capitol now has a monument to, well, it wasn't a monument, but something about Satan. How did this come about, and what's the reaction been to it?
So in the state capitol, there's a Christmas tree, I think there's a menorah, there's the nativity scene, and that came, I think, just a few weeks back in November, and as I've heard, it's something they do every year. People can bring in things to kind of celebrate the upcoming holidays, and then a few weeks later, we see this satanic statue. I don't know what you would necessarily call
Something
it.
about knowledge in an apple or something.
Yeah, and so while, people have argued you have your First Amendment right, I would say at the same time, this Christmas tree or this menorah, they're not just up in the middle of July just for fun. They're here to resemble something. So if there was some sort of maybe satanic holiday around this time, which I'm not gonna lie, I don't know if there is, but if there was, then I guess, they have the right for this to be up if it is celebrating something just as the menorah and the nativity scene are.
I mean, it's somewhat perennial. We had the infamous Festivus poll.
Which was a joke from the Seinfeld TV shows a few years ago,
On some level, I kind of look at this, maybe it's just me, but it's kind of a chuckle sort of thing. But at another, is it harmless fun? Does it mean, every year, well, at least so far, I think one legislator has at least bit on this, so to speak, and said, this is outrageous, what a horrible thing, I don't like Satan, I'm against Satan, which is probably a safe, statement to make. Why do we allow these decorations? I guess we go into the local courthouse here in Sangamon County. That doesn't happen there. I don't think you're allowed to put up your own Christmas tree or outside things. Why do we allow it in the Capitol? Should we allow it in the Capitol? Should we just say, you know what, we don't want Satan, we don't want Festivus polls, we let's just stick with the statues of the good politicians who brought us to where we're at?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I should say it's the state itself that puts up that giant Christmas tree that extends up 2 stories into the rotunda. The other ones are privately funded. There's also a sign from the Secretary of State's office that says, based on the First Amendment, we have to put up any display that, as long as it's not paid for with tax dollars. I'm not sure if you got into something even more controversial. Well, I would argue is more controversial. What's the least common denominator is if the Nazis wanted to put up a holiday display or something. Would the state be compelled to allow that? That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
There's also a Free Thinkers, I think it's called, sign that sort of celebrates non-belief this time of year. And in fact, one of my colleagues, Rachel Otwell, spoke to one of the Satanists. This is a Chicago-based group, and said that for them, it's more. These are not people who really believe in a Satan as a actual spiritual being or something that they worship. It's more of a metaphor for non-belief or being opposed to sort of a theistic frame of reference. And so, and in fact, that's what the statue is. It's a woman's hand holding an apple with a serpent coiled around it. The idea being Eve, right, offering the apple to Adam from the tree of knowledge, and there's a little inscription that says, "Knowledge is the greatest gift." This seems to be the price if you're going to allow Christian displays. Then other groups are going to want to get on it, and that's where we are. With
Jesse White's disclaimer at the bottom, I had nothing to do with this.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I guess not to endorse Satan. I'm not endorsing Satan, but it's not a bad-looking little with the hand and the apple and
it's got a red glow.
Inside it's not like it's just a devil statue sitting there. Like when I first I saw a news article before I saw it, and then I went and looked at it myself, and I was like, okay, once again, not endorsing Satan, but it's not that bad.
Well, I mean, and as you say, the Nazis, you could say the swastika is a symbol that goes back many, many, many years before, and you get that, but we're out of time, and so we'll have to talk about it another day. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Capitol View.